Dear learners, welcome to this session on environmental threats and opportunities. We all have studied the environment of NGOs and what is exactly the environment, how NGOs operate in a certain kind of an environment. In this section, we will be covering certain threats and opportunities related to the NGO environment. Usually this concept is used in the business world or the corporate houses, but this concept is lot more prevalent in other organizations, be it service organizations or voluntary organizations, whatever the case may be. Even in the non-profit sector, the environmental threats and opportunities, they play a major role in the performance and the productivity of the organization and how the strategies are formulated for those organizations. So in this section, we would be discussing the threats and opportunities, the basic idea of what is threat and what is opportunities. Now this whole series of few videos will be covering environment in different formats. It would be covering the mega environment, it would be covering the micro environment, then it would be covering the opportunity matrix, threat matrix, and then different kinds of analysis like PESTEL and SWOT. So in different sessions, we would be discussing different parts of the environment and how it is being measured. But in this section, this is just a prelude to all the sessions which would be succeeding this particular session. So in this case, when we talk about the environment, we have seen that there are two kinds of environment for any kind of an organization. Even in our homes, we have a specific environment, and that also works like an organization. So we have an internal environment and an external environment. The external environment in this case, specifically in this case, it is divided into three major different kinds of elements or environment. One is the mega environment, the second is the micro environment, and the third is the relevant environment. So in this case, the mega environment and the micro environment, the constituents we would be discussing in the succeeding sessions. This whole concept of environment is the sum of all the internal and external factors which formulate or which form a particular environment of an NGO. Now let us see what are threats. Now if we see the dictionary meaning or the English language and we just hear that there are certain kind of sentences that he has been threatened. So in these cases, if you see, threat refers to a certain kind of a negative influence, like it doesn't have a positive meaning to it, and it reduces the productivity of an organization to a large extent. And of course, it brings a bad name to the organization. Now, there are certain kinds of threats related to the organization. Now, if we see the different kinds of threats, it can be a kind of data and information loss for the organization. There may be security issues, there may be lack of funds. So all these are threats related to the organization. Now if we talk about the individuals, there are certain threats related to the individuals, like if there is a successful individual, he or she may be targeted for certain other factors that he or she may not be successful. So there are certain kinds of threats. But when we speak about threat in the environmental context, in relation to NGO environment, it is basically related to the negative influence which reduces the productivity and efficiency of an organization, bringing a bad name, because once the efficiency of the organization due to these threats is lost, then in that case the productivity of the organization also reduces to a large extent. And if we take the example of, say, data and information loss, suppose there are certain kind of bugs, there are certain kind of viruses and in technological environment, they do affect the whole data and the information of the organization that can be hacked. Now, if that hacking acts as a threat and the data is lost and there are security issues related to the technological aspects of the organization, then it is very difficult for the organization to be productive in nature. So these are various kinds of threats. Coming to the concept of opportunities. If we see the financial sector, if we see the marketing sector, manufacturing sector, service organization, everywhere this word comes again and again. So opportunities, they are just the opposite of threats. Now, it relates to the favorable external factors and it gives an organization a competitive advantage. For example, innovation in times of crisis. Now, this is the crisis period. Now, there are certain organizations, specifically NGOs, the non-voluntary sector. They have been excellently combating with the crisis in a different manner. Unlike the corporate houses, unlike the service organization, the NGOs have been working really hard to combat the crisis and provide the development and welfare services to the society to a large extent. Now, suppose we take an example of when the crisis started. The NGOs and the welfare organizations, all sorts of voluntary organizations, they came together and they started feeding the poor. Now, this is one kind of a challenge which was posed before them and they took it as an opportunity. So most of the organizations or the voluntary sectors and voluntary individuals, they have come together and they have been working on these issues. Now, one beautiful example of the voluntary sector is Feed India. Now, this started with a single man trying to feed the poor people or the migrant workers in the country, and slowly this movement, people joined in, the voluntary organizations joined in, and the one-man movement became a massive kind of a movement, a voluntary effort, a voluntary movement which provided foods. It is still providing say grocery items, the packed foods in different parts of the country. It started with at a small scale with individual effort, with individual amount, and slowly it picked up and it became a massive movement. So Feed India is one of the example of the voluntary sector where the challenges or the issues where they were converted into opportunities. So though the factors were external factors were not favorable, but though the opportunity was tapped in and the organization worked for the competitive advantage. Now, if we say the innovation in times of crisis, there is a certain kind of an innovation process. So there are many organizations which have been working on these lines, and Akshay Path is one of the organizations which has been working, which has been using innovation as a concept, and how the innovation process works. Now let us see how the innovation process works. Now if you see the diagram, this is just like a funnel. And you put in the ideas, you put in the concept, you put in the solutions, you put in the problems also, and the solutions for those problems. And then you just turn and through the funnel, the implementation part comes. And the idea is converted into a solid concept which can be implemented. So now this innovation process starts with a basic idea. It just clicks like a bulb. The bulb is switched on, so the idea generates. And when the idea generates, there are many options available to materialize this idea into a fruitful concept. So how do they do it? For this, there is a whole process of strategic management which we would be discussing in later sections. And then the idea is built in and the concept is developed, certain problems or issues or challenges that they are taken care of, and then after filtering all the issues and challenges, the idea is implemented into a concrete solution. And this is what is an innovation process. Now coming to environmental threats. We have talked about the threats and opportunities as a concept. Now coming to environmental threats specifically related to NGOs. These are certain challenges which have been posed by an unfavorable trend or development in the environment, and they lead, in the absence of purposeful action, to the erosion of the organization's position. Now this is very important to understand. Now you must, this word erosion has been used here in relation to environmental threats. Now this is quite a substantive word which has been used. This means that if the organization is not able to bear the threats, then the environment of the organization, the existence of that organization is kind of derooted. Erosion is a concept where the forests, they lose the roots and the soil and the binding is lost, and they start eroding, they start moving, they start they are not in a particular format to grow in a favorable environment. So this is that is why this concept has been used, that threats also act like pests and like the extreme conditions like floods, like drought situations, etc. So threats are also like these for organizations' position. They have the attractive arena for organizations' action, and organization enjoys the competitive advantage, but then they have the threats associated to it. So in opportunities, the organization enjoys the competitive advantage, but in threats, the organization starts eroding. So this is basically a concept of environmental threats. So threats and opportunities, they are the functions of managerial viewpoint and action. We were talking about environmental threats. So environmental threats, they are unfavorable trends, and the organizations, they do not have purposeful action, which leads to the erosion of the position of organization in the market or in the environment in which it exists. So when we talk about threats and opportunities, they are the functions of managerial viewpoint and action. Now let us discuss the various segments of the environment. This is the classification of the environment, and we have the mega environment, we have the micro environment, and we have the relevant environment. So we would be discussing these three environments in different sense, but then the constituents we would be discussing in different sessions. So when we talk about the taxonomy of the organization's environment, now it is very much visible from these four semicircles. You would find that it starts with the internal environment. You see, the internal environment is the environment of the organization, where you have the employers, where you have the suppliers, where you have the organizational contents inside the organization, inside the NGOs. Now leading to that there's a micro environment. There are small different kinds of environment which are prevalent for that particular organization, and that we call as the micro environment. Now moving ahead, there's a relevant environment. Now when we talk about the relevant environment, it covers the mega environment also. Though the circle is, you can see it is below the mega part, but it can cover the mega environment also if it is relevant to that particular environment. So relevant environment is there, and then we have the mega environment, which has a broader outlook. Now this is what is the taxonomy of the organization's environment. Now when we talk about the mega environment, mega means big. Basically it is the external environment. It is also known as the general environment. And there are certain constituents related to the mega environment, and these are the technological environment, social environment, political environment, and economic environment. Basically, technological and economic environment are the two major environments constituents associated with the mega environment. Now, in this case, very interesting feature of the mega environment is that the classification of this particular general environment can be international, can be national, can be regional, can be local, anything. And even it can be at the community level. So this is the mega environment. But when we do the analysis of that organization, now suppose an NGO is located in a small community. So in that case, the mega environment of that community would be affected. So, and if the organization, suppose if the NGO is international in nature, then the classification will be related to the international environment also. So depending on the situation where the NGO is located, how it is working, what kind of NGO it is, all these factors, they are considered for analyzing the mega environment. Now suppose we are analyzing the NGO. In that case, it can be international or global economic perspective we can analyze for that NGO. Then we can have because NGO is located in particular region, so when we analyze the political situation, it will be the regional political environment of that particular region. And if the NGO is at the national level, so we have already done the impact of global economic environment, and then we can see the national social environment, because that NGO is related to the socio-cultural factors throughout the nation. So national social environment is analyzed. So when we try to analyze the mega environment of any NGO, it can have a mix of international, national, regional, local, community level, whatever the case may be. It is not necessary that it only has the international mega environment analysis or national mega environment analysis or regional environment analysis, etc. So the mega environment constitutes different aspects: technological, social, political, economic, international, national, regional, local, whatever is applicable to particularly to that organization or whatever is specific to that organization. Coming to the micro environment. So when we talk about the micro environment, it has a substantial impact on the current operations of the organization. Any development in micro environment becomes dominant for taking the strategic decisions, because it is a kind of the environment for the organization. So these constituents, they include the competition, the suppliers, the customers, the financial institutions, the regulatory organizations, and various channels of distribution. So micro environment constitutes at a smaller level constitutes different functionaries which are related to the organization. As I said, the internal environment is related to the employees and etc. the employer. The micro and mega environment, they are related to the external factors associated in and around the organization. Now comes the relevant environment. This is very important to understand, because NGOs, they offer varied services. Some NGOs may be related to the human trafficking, some NGOs may be related to feeding the poor, some NGOs may be related to helping the old age, and some NGOs may be related to the child education, the girl child education, etc. So each service includes many types of micro environments. And one micro environment, one particular environment is specific for a particular group. Now, if we are talking about the girl education, child education for the girl child, so in that case, if the education is for the girl child, the micro environment is related to all the aspects of education. So that is a specific group. So entire micro environment cannot be considered for each specific service. Therefore, the organization has to restrict the scope of its search opportunities or the analysis part for safeguarding against threats in a relevant environment. Now, if it exceeds that relevant environment, then the confusion arises. There is a lot of confusion and the organization is not able to tap in the opportunities. Organization is not able to see beyond the scope of that environment. So that is why relevant environment is very, very important, though the environment is always unpredictable, and micro and relevant environment, they do change with the changes happening in the mega environment. Now coming to one interesting aspect, there are certain analysis, there are different like SWOT analysis, like pestle analysis, like steeple, like steep analysis, like pest analysis. There are number of environmental analysis being done. But the overall environmental threat and opportunity profile is performed through ETOP analysis. So it is E for environmental, T for threat, O for opportunity, and P is for profile. Now, ETOP was given by Glueck. He was a big strategic management expert, and he was given the definition of strategy in different formats. So he described the concept of ETOP. The ETOP involves dividing the environment into different sectors. Now, here you are not dividing the environment into mega, micro, or relevant. Only the sectors are considered in this case, and the impact of these sectors is done by subdividing, by further dividing each of the environmental sectors into sub-factors if required. Now, when you subdivide it, it converts into a kind of a pestle analysis, which we are not covering in this session. Then the impact of each sub-factor is assessed on the organization, the analysis is performed, and then a threat and opportunity profile is built in on which the organization works. Now, I'll just give you a small table how it works, and it can be prepared for any of the NGOs. Now, you can just go to the published material available on the websites of any of the NGOs, any kind of the NGOs of your choice, and you can easily perform the environmental threat and opportunity profile for that particular NGO. Now, if you see this ETOP, now I have just segregated on the one column the environmental indicators, and on the other column the degree of impact. There is a third column also where the factors are subdivided, like political factors can be subdivided, the market factors can be subdivided, the international factors can be subdivided, and so on. So, but that I have not done here is because you need to understand the whole concept of ETOP here. Now, suppose I'm taking any of the NGOs, say NGO A. Now, NGO A, the environmental indicator in the present context, this ETOP has been done in the present context. So, all the NGOs usually are facing a similar kind of a situation. Now, if we say the political environment, then the degree of impact may be neutral in this case, because the pressure from the government during the time of crisis is not so much on those NGOs, and NGOs are of course not controlled by the government, so they can work on their own in this case. Now, the markets are quite low, but in certain cases the markets may be high, but the selling is low because of the crisis situation. So therefore the degree of impact of the market is low on the NGO. The regulatory mechanisms have not changed, so it is always neutral in this case. The funding is definitely the impact of funding is low in this case. It can be high also in certain cases. In cases like the regional NGOs or the community NGOs, the funding can be high also. That means the degree of impact of funding is high. Because the funding is not being done, so the impact is very high in certain cases, but where the funding is being done in different forms, the impact is low. So this is how it is being done. If you see the technological aspects, in certain cases the impact of technology is very high. Any of the organization which is following the innovative processes, which is using the technology, the degree of impact of that particular sector is very high. But the NGOs which are not using the technological sectors, the impact may be low. So this is how the idea works. Then economical aspects. Economical aspects may be low, may be high. Now in this case, what I have taken a very stabilized NGO. That is why this is how it is coming up. Now if you are taking the startup NGO or the budding NGO, the degree of impact may vary. Like in funding cases, the degree of impact would be very high. In technological cases, the degree of impact may be low. In economical cases, the degree of impact would be very, very high. And in social cases, it is usually high. So this is how the ETOP analysis of an NGO is done. Now to conclude the whole concept of environmental threats and opportunities, we need to understand the environment and the environmental threats and opportunities, because they help the organization to identify the threats, to identify the opportunities available with them. It makes the organizations quite dynamic. That means ready for change. It makes the organizations quite flexible. It leads to the long-term growth, and it creates a kind of an atmosphere or the environment where the organization is socially accepted. And of course, it teaches the organization how to optimize the resources, and of course the organization learns how to adapt to the changing conditions. Now this crisis situation gives a beautiful example of the environmental analysis for any kind of an organization, and specifically for NGOs. So to conclude the session, we can say that environment is very, very important for any kind of organization, especially NGOs. Thank you so much.